The courtroom was silent, so silent that the sound of breathing felt deafening. Then, the judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack, cutting through the heavy air like a blade. Guilty, the voice echoed. Sentenced to death. A ripple of gasps spread through the crowd. Journalists scrambled to write, cameras flashed, and whispers of disbelief spread like wildfire. The man standing before the judge, a once respected police officer, stood frozen, his face drained of color. His heart pounded, but he wasn't afraid of dying. No, what hurt more than anything was knowing that no one believed him. His colleagues, his friends, even the people he swore to protect, everyone had turned their backs. Everyone, except one. A deep, heart-wrenching whimper broke the courtroom's tense silence. Max. The German shepherd sat near the defendant's table, his eyes locked onto his owner. His ears perked up, his tail still. He didn't understand what was happening, but he could feel it. Something was terribly wrong. As the bailiffs moved toward the officer, Max let out a low growl, a sound of warning. But no one took it seriously. "Move the dog," one of them muttered. The officer turned, his eyes locking onto Max's. "Easy, boy," he whispered. But Max wouldn't stop staring, wouldn't stop growling. The dog wasn't just loyal, he knew something was wrong. The bailiffs grabbed the officer by the arms and began dragging him toward the exit. That's when it happened. Max lunged. A snarl ripped through the courtroom as the dog sprang forward, knocking over a chair. People screamed, scrambling backward. Max didn't attack, he just planted himself firmly in front of the officer, his body rigid, his eyes fierce. No matter how many times the bailiffs tried to move forward, Max refused to let them. He stood his ground. "Get that dog out of here," a guard shouted. But Max didn't move. He let out a long, deep howl that sent chills down everyone's spine. It wasn't an angry howl. It was something else. A cry. A desperate plea. An older man sitting in the back of the courtroom narrowed his eyes. He had seen many things in his life, but this was different. The way the dog reacted, the way his body language screamed something no one else could hear. He knew. Something wasn't right. And if Max was this desperate, it meant only one thing: his owner wasn't guilty. But by the time the thought fully formed in the old man's mind, the officer had already disappeared beyond the courtroom doors. And Max? Max wasn't giving up. He would find a way to prove the truth. Even if no one else would. The air inside the prison cell was thick, damp, and lifeless. The once respected police officer sat on the thin mattress, staring at the concrete wall. His hands trembled slightly, not out of fear, but out of disbelief. It had all happened so fast. One day, he was a dedicated officer of the law, a man who had sworn to protect and serve. The next, he was being called a murderer, sentenced to die for a crime he didn't commit. But none of that mattered anymore. The trial was over. His fate had been sealed. The only thing that still held any meaning was Max. The officer closed his eyes, replaying the moment in the courtroom, the way Max had growled, the way he had lunged, the way his howl had filled the room with a sorrow no one could ignore. That wasn't just loyalty. That was something deeper. A truth no one else could see. Because Max knew. And if Max knew, maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. 2 months earlier. The case that had destroyed his life had started like any other. A gruesome murder in a quiet neighborhood. The victim, a well-known businessman with powerful connections. He had been found in his office, a single gunshot wound to the chest, the room ransacked as if someone had been looking for something. The officer had been one of the first on the scene. He still remembered the way Max had reacted when they arrived at the crime scene. The dog had sniffed around the office, his body tense, his tail stiff. Something had been off. Max had sensed it before anyone else did. But at the time, no one paid attention to a dog's instincts. The investigation moved quickly. Too quickly. Within days, the officer himself had been accused of the murder. The evidence against him had seemed airtight. A surveillance camera near the crime scene had captured a shadowy figure entering the building that night, someone wearing a jacket identical to his. A gun registered in his name had been found at the scene, wiped clean, but still traceable to him. And then there was the motive, something that had made people turn against him faster than he could have imagined. The businessman had been involved in a corruption case, one that the officer had been quietly investigating. And the prosecution painted a perfect picture. A cop, frustrated by a system that protected the powerful, had taken justice into his own hands. That was the story everyone believed. That was the story that sent him to death row. But there was one thing that had never made sense to him, something no one had ever explained. If he had really committed the murder, why was Max acting as if the real danger was still out there? Max's strange behavior. Back in the city, far from the cold prison walls, Max was restless. Ever since the trial, he had refused to eat properly. He would pace near the officer's empty home, scratching at the door, whining into the night. It was as if he was waiting for his master to return. But more than that, he was searching. His new caretaker, a fellow officer who had taken him in after the trial, noticed it right away. Max wasn't behaving like a dog who had lost his owner. He was behaving like a dog on a mission. One night, Max did something unexpected. He escaped. The caretaker had left the back gate unlocked for just a moment, and in that moment, Max took off like a bullet, vanishing into the night. But he wasn't running away. He was running toward something. The old detective. The same old detective who had been in the courtroom that day sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, nursing a cup of coffee. He had retired years ago, but some habits never faded. His mind was still sharp, his instincts still strong. And something about this case wasn't sitting right with him. He had seen plenty of guilty men in his time. He knew what they looked like, how they acted, how their eyes darted, how their hands twitched under pressure. But the officer, he had been different. And then there was the dog. A German shepherd trained to detect danger, trained to sense fear, trained to know when something wasn't right. That dog hadn't just been defending his owner. He had been trying to tell them something. The detective ran a hand over his face, exhaling. His gut told him the case wasn't as simple as it seemed. And if there was even a chance that an innocent man was about to be executed, he needed to find out the truth. The warehouse clue. It was nearly midnight when Max finally stopped running. His paws ached, but his nose had led him here, to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Max sniffed the air, his ears twitching. He could smell something familiar. He padded forward cautiously, his eyes scanning the dark interior. Then he saw it. A single piece of cloth. It was small, torn, barely noticeable, but Max recognized the scent immediately. And for the first time since his master had been taken away, Max let out a low, determined growl. Because now, he had proof. Now, he had a trail. And he wasn't stopping until he found the truth. A race against time. The detective leaned against his car, staring at the police station's cold, gray walls. He had spent the last few days digging through old files, trying to find something, anything, that didn't add up in the case. And what he had found was troubling. Witness statements that contradicted each other. Security footage with missing frames. And the most damning detail of all. The murder weapon, the gun that had supposedly belonged to the officer, had never actually been tested for fingerprints. It was a mistake so obvious it should have been caught in the first week of the investigation. Unless someone had made sure it wasn't caught. The detective exhaled, rubbing his temples. If he was right, then the real killer was still out there. And worse. They had framed an innocent man. A man who was running out of time. The first breakthrough. Max returned to the city at dawn, his fur matted with dirt, his paws sore. But he didn't stop. He went straight to the detective's apartment, whining and scratching at the door. When the detective opened it, he was shocked to see the dog standing there, a piece of cloth clutched between his teeth. Frowning, he took it, turning it over in his hands. It was dirty, frayed, but something about it felt important. Then he smelled it. Gunpowder. And that's when the detective realized. Max hadn't just brought him a piece of fabric. He had brought him evidence. And if they followed this trail, they just might save an innocent man before it was too late. The morning sun barely peeked through the blinds of the old detective's small apartment. He sat in his chair, staring at the torn piece of fabric Max had brought him the night before. His gut told him this wasn't just any scrap of cloth, this was a clue. A trail. And Max had led him straight to it. The detective glanced down at the German shepherd, who lay by his feet, panting lightly. The dog had run for miles to bring him this. That kind of determination wasn't just instinct, it was desperation. Max wasn't just trying to prove his master's innocence. He was trying to save his life. The detective sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right, boy," he muttered. "Let's see what you've got." Max won't stop. The detective wasn't the only one who noticed Max's behavior. Back at the police station, where the officer used to work, his former colleagues were starting to whisper. Max had always been a disciplined dog, trained for precision, for obedience. But ever since his master had been taken away, he had become restless, unpredictable. Even now, in the caretaker's home, Max refused to settle. He paced near the door, whining at night, scratching at the floorboards as if searching for something that wasn't there. The caretaker, another officer who had taken Max in after the trial, tried everything: walks, food, comfort. But nothing worked. Max was waiting. Waiting for someone to listen. Following the trail. The detective wasted no time. He had spent decades solving cases, but this one felt different. The courtroom, the trial, the sentence, it had all moved too quickly. Almost as if someone wanted it to be over before people started asking too many questions. He needed to go back to where Max had come from. The warehouse. The place where Max had found the torn piece of fabric. The detective grabbed his coat and gestured for Max to follow. The dog perked up immediately, his tail wagging slightly. He knew. He could sense that someone was finally listening. As they reached the warehouse, the detective took a slow breath. The building was old, abandoned, its walls covered in graffiti. A place people didn't usually go unless they had something to hide. Max wasted no time. He sniffed the ground, moving with purpose, his nose leading him toward a pile of discarded boxes. His body stiffened. He started to dig. The detective knelt beside him, brushing away the dust and debris. And then, his fingers touched something cold. Metal. His eyes narrowed as he pulled the object from the dirt. It was a small, rusted gun, partially wrapped in plastic. And the moment he saw it, his stomach twisted. This wasn't the gun from the trial. This was something else entirely. A second weapon. A clue everyone missed. The detective carefully inspected the gun. It was old, but not unusable. The serial number had been scratched off, making it untraceable. He had seen this before. A planted weapon. Someone had hidden this here, but why? And more importantly, who? Max let out a small whine, nudging the gun with his nose. The detective exhaled. "You're onto something, aren't you, boy?" He bagged the gun and took out his phone. He knew a guy, a former forensic expert, who still owed him a favor. If there were fingerprints, traces of blood, anything, he needed to find out. Because if this gun was connected to the crime, it meant the real killer was still out there. Max knows the truth. Max wasn't finished. He started moving again, sniffing around the warehouse, his body tense. He moved to the far side of the building, where an old, rusted door hung half open. The detective followed, his heart pounding. Max was onto something. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the floor was littered with broken glass. The detective stepped carefully, scanning the area. And then he saw it. A single, crumpled piece of paper, half buried beneath the dirt. He picked it up, carefully unfolding it. It was a receipt. His eyes scanned the text. It was from a hardware store. The purchase? A pair of gloves, cleaning supplies, and duct tape. The detective frowned. This wasn't just any receipt. This was a shopping list for a crime scene cleanup. And it was dated the night before the murder. His hands tightened around the paper. Someone had planned this. Someone had gone out of their way to frame the officer. And now, thanks to Max, he had proof. The dangerous discovery. The detective knew he had to be careful. Whoever had set this up had done a good job. Too good. And that meant they were dangerous. He took the receipt, the gun, and the torn piece of fabric back to his apartment, locking the door behind him. But as he turned, he saw Max standing by the window, ears perked. He was staring at something. Or someone. The detective's pulse quickened. Slowly, he moved to the window and peeked outside. A black car sat parked across the street. The windows were tinted, the engine running. Someone was watching. And that's when the detective knew. Whoever had framed the officer. They weren't done yet. The threat grows. The next few days were tense. The detective laid low, keeping Max close, watching his surroundings. The black car showed up twice more. Whoever they were, they knew he was getting close. He made a call to an old contact in the department, requesting access to the original case files. He needed to see everything, every report, every witness statement. And that's when he saw it. Buried deep in the files was something that had been overlooked. A name. A witness who had originally claimed to see someone else enter the crime scene that night. A witness whose statement had been quietly erased from the final report. The detective's hands shook as he read the name. Because he knew this person. And if they had been silenced, it meant the truth was even bigger than he had imagined. Max won't give up. Max was restless. He could feel the tension in the air. He stayed close to the detective, his ears twitching at every sound, his body ready to act at a moment's notice. Because deep down, Max knew something was coming. Something dangerous. The detective exhaled. He had spent years chasing criminals, uncovering lies, exposing corruption. But this? This was different. Because this time, he wasn't just solving a case. He was fighting to save an innocent man. And thanks to Max, he just might have a chance. The detective sat in his dimly lit apartment, his fingers tapping against the old case file. Max lay beside him, his ears perked, eyes watching every movement in the room. He could sense the tension, the silent urgency, pressing down on his master's old friend. The name in the report burned in the detective's mind. It was the key to everything. A witness had seen something, a witness who had been erased from the official investigation. And that meant someone had gone to great lengths to keep them quiet. The detective took a slow breath and reached for his phone. He dialed a number he hadn't called in years. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Yeah? It's me, the detective said. I need a favor. There was silence on the other end. Then, a sigh. You never call unless there's trouble. There's always trouble, the detective muttered. I need an address. He gave the name from the case file. There was a pause, followed by the sound of keys clacking on a keyboard. This guy disappeared months ago, the voice on the line said. No job, no records, nothing. But he's alive? A long pause. Then, yeah. Last known address is outside the city. Rural area. But listen, be careful. If someone erased him from the files, they won't want him found. The detective exhaled. I figured. He hung up, grabbed his coat, and glanced down at Max. The dog was already on his feet, tail stiff, eyes locked onto him. "You coming?" the detective asked. Max didn't hesitate. The road to the truth. The drive out of the city was long, the sky growing darker as the detective headed toward the last known address. The road was empty, lined with trees, the kind of place people went when they wanted to disappear. As he drove, his mind raced. If this witness had seen something, why had their statement been removed? Had they been threatened? Paid off? Or worse, silenced? Max sat in the passenger seat, his head low, but his eyes alert. He could feel it too. The weight of something about to change. Finally, the detective pulled onto a dirt road. A small, run-down house stood at the end, the windows dark. No cars in sight. No movement. For a moment, he hesitated. If this was a trap, walking in unprepared could be a mistake. Then Max let out a low growl. Someone was inside. The witness speaks. The detective stepped out of the car carefully, keeping one hand near his side where his old revolver rested. He knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he called. "I just need to talk." A long silence. Then, shuffling from inside. The door creaked open an inch, and a single eye peered out. It was bloodshot, tired, filled with something between fear and exhaustion. "I don't know anything," the man muttered, trying to close the door. The detective pressed a hand against it. "Then why did someone go out of their way to erase you from the files?" The man stiffened. He swallowed hard, glancing past the detective like he expected someone to be watching. "I didn't see anything," he whispered. "I swear." Max let out a low growl. The detective studied the man carefully. "That's not true, is it?" The witness looked down at the dog, at the fire in his eyes, and something in him cracked. His shoulders sagged. He opened the door wider, stepping aside. "Come inside." The missing piece. The house was small, barely furnished, as if the man had packed his things and left in a hurry. He sat on a worn-out couch, rubbing his hands together. "I didn't know what I was getting into," he said finally. "I was just walking by that night, heading home. I wasn't supposed to see anything." The detective leaned forward. "See what?" The man swallowed. There were 2 people in the building. Not 1. 2. The detective's heart pounded. "Describe them." The man shook his head. "I couldn't see their faces clearly. But one of them, he wasn't your guy. He was taller. Thinner. He was wearing gloves. And when the shot went off, he didn't run. He walked out like he knew no one would stop him." The detective's blood ran cold. "Did you tell anyone this?" "I tried." The man laughed bitterly. "But before I could testify, someone came to my house. Told me if I said a word, I'd disappear." He looked down. "So I left." The detective exhaled. It all made sense now. The case had been rushed, the evidence planted, the real story buried. And an innocent man had been sentenced to die because of it. Max whined softly, as if he understood the gravity of what had just been uncovered. The detective stood. "You have to come with me. We need to get your statement to someone who'll listen." The witness hesitated, but after a moment, he nodded. And that's when the first gunshot rang out. The trap. The detective barely had time to react before the window behind him shattered. He grabbed the witness and pulled him down as another shot tore through the air. Max barked, his body tense, ready to fight. The detective peeked outside. A black SUV sat at the edge of the road. 2 figures moved toward the house. They had been followed. "Move," the detective hissed. He pushed the witness toward the back door, Max at their heels. They ran out into the night, disappearing into the trees as more gunshots rang out behind them. The detective's mind raced. This wasn't just a cover-up. This was an execution. Whoever was behind this didn't just want the case closed. They wanted everyone who knew the truth dead. As they ran through the darkness, Max suddenly stopped. His ears perked, his nose twitching. Then, without hesitation, he took off in a different direction. The detective hesitated until he saw headlights in the distance. Back up. Somehow, Max had known. As they emerged onto the main road, a squad car screeched to a stop, officers jumping out, weapons raised. The detective held up his hands. "We need protection," he shouted. "This man is a key witness." The officers hesitated, then recognized the detective's face. Within seconds, they were rushing them into the car. Max jumped in last, his eyes never leaving the road behind them. And as the car sped away, the detective knew. The real fight was just beginning. The squad car raced through the dark, the sirens off to avoid drawing attention. The detective sat in the back with the witness, breathing heavily. Max was next to them, panting but alert, his eyes locked on the road behind them. The detective glanced at the officer in the front seat. "Do you have a safe house?" The officer, a younger guy who looked like he had been on the force for only a few years, nodded quickly. "Yeah, an old station on the outskirts of town. Hardly anyone knows about it." The detective nodded. "Get us there fast." The witness sat still, shaking. His face was pale, his hands clenched into fists. He had been hiding for months, and now he was running for his life. Max leaned against him slightly, as if sensing his fear. The witness let out a small breath, reaching out to scratch behind Max's ear. The detective watched this moment. Max had a way of knowing who needed comfort, who needed protection. Right now, this man was the key to everything. If anything happened to him, the truth would die with him. The SUV that had attacked them earlier was nowhere in sight, but that didn't mean they were safe. Whoever was behind this cover-up had eyes everywhere. And they wouldn't stop until the witness was dead. The safe house. The squad car pulled up to an old police station, long abandoned but still intact. The brick walls were weathered, the windows covered in dust. "This used to be an old outpost," the officer explained as they hurried inside. "No one really comes here anymore." The detective took a deep breath. For now, it would have to do. Inside, the air was stale, and the lights flickered weakly. The detective checked the windows, nothing but empty streets. They had a little time, but not much. He turned to the witness. "Tell me everything. Every detail." The witness rubbed his hands together, his eyes darting toward the door as if expecting someone to burst in at any second. "I told you, there were 2 men that night. But the second man. I didn't just see him leave." The detective narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" The witness swallowed. "I heard him talking to someone on the phone. He said, 'It's done. The cop's the fall guy.'" The room went silent. Max let out a small growl, pacing near the door. The detective's jaw tightened. This was it. This was the proof he needed. Someone had set up the entire crime scene, knowing the officer would take the blame. And now, they had a lead. "Did you recognize his voice?" the detective asked. The witness hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I think it was someone in the department. A traitor in uniform." The detective felt a chill run down his spine. If someone inside the police force had orchestrated this, then they were up against more than just criminals. They were up against the law itself. He stood up, pacing. "We need to get this information to the right people." The younger officer in the room frowned. "Who can we trust?" That was the problem. If someone in the department had erased the witness's statement, framed an innocent man, and was now hunting them down, how many others were involved? The detective ran a hand through his hair. "I have one person," he muttered. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. After a few rings, a voice picked up. "This better be important," the voice grumbled. "It is," the detective said. "I need to meet. Now." The voice on the other end hesitated. Where? Somewhere public. The detective glanced at Max, who was still staring at the door. The dog could sense something unseen. And that's when the first shot hit the window. Under attack. The glass shattered, and everyone dropped to the floor. Down, the detective shouted, pulling the witness to the ground. Max barked furiously, his body low, ready to spring into action. More gunshots rang out, hitting the walls, sending dust and debris into the air. They found us, the younger officer gasped, reaching for his gun. The detective gritted his teeth. We need to move. Crawling toward the back exit, he motioned for the others to follow. Max stayed close to the witness, his body tense. As soon as they reached the door, the detective kicked it open. The alley behind the station was empty, but they didn't have much time. We head for the train yard, he ordered. Too many places to hide. They won't risk a full shootout. The witness was shaking, but he nodded. The young officer took one last glance back. They're coming, he muttered. Max held his ground, his sharp eyes locked on the officer, waiting for any sign of movement. The officer smirked. Killing me won't change anything. The detective didn't blink. I don't need to kill you, he said, reaching for his handcuffs. I just need to make sure you don't hurt anyone else. Just as he snapped one cuff onto the officer's wrist, a gunshot rang out. The officer jerked forward, his body tensing, before going limp. Blood seeped through his shirt. The detective spun around, his heart racing. A second figure stood at the end of the train yard, holding a silenced pistol. The real mastermind had arrived. The puppet master revealed. The figure stepped closer, their polished shoes clicking against the gravel. The dim glow of the streetlight revealed a man in a sharp suit, his expression cold and calculated. Max let out a deep, guttural growl. The detective clenched his jaw. He recognized the man immediately. It was the chief of police. Step away from him, the chief ordered, his voice calm, controlled, too controlled. The detective didn't move. He looked down at the dying officer, who struggled to breathe. He was your cleanup crew, the detective muttered, realization sinking in. And now you're tying up loose ends. The chief smirked. It's nothing personal. Max took a step forward, his teeth bared, ready to attack. The chief sighed. Call off the dog, detective. I don't want to shoot him, but I will. The detective gritted his teeth. His mind raced for a way out. If the chief was here, that meant backup was on the way. He and Max had maybe seconds before more corrupt officers arrived. The only way out was through. The escape. Without warning, the detective kicked up a cloud of dirt, blinding the chief for a split second. Max, go, he shouted. Max lunged, not at the chief, but at the gun, his powerful jaws clamping down on the man's wrist. The chief fired, but the shot went wild, missing its target. The detective dove forward, tackling the chief to the ground. They struggled, fists flying, bodies rolling against the gravel. The chief was strong, but the detective had something he didn't, righteous fury. A hard punch to the ribs. A sharp elbow to the jaw. The detective pinned him down, breathing heavily. But then, sirens in the distance. More police cars were coming. But were they here to help? Or to clean up the mess? The detective made a decision. He grabbed Max's collar and ran. A desperate chase. The train yard was a maze of steel and shadows. The detective and Max weaved between rusted train cars, gunshots ringing out behind them. The chief was still alive, barking orders into his radio. The detective heard it, find them. Kill them. Max ran ahead, leading the way. The detective followed, his lungs burning, his heart pounding. A fence loomed ahead, the only way out. Max, up, the detective commanded. Without hesitation, Max leaped, his strong legs propelling him over the metal barrier. The detective followed, scrambling up just as a bullet whizzed past his head. He hit the ground hard on the other side but didn't stop moving. They disappeared into the night, hiding in the shadows. They ran until their legs couldn't carry them anymore. Until the city swallowed them whole. The detective ducked into an old warehouse, pulling Max inside. The dog panted hard, his body tense. The detective leaned against the cold concrete wall, trying to catch his breath. They were running out of time. The only way to clear the officer's name was to bring everything into the light. But how? The department was compromised. The courts were compromised. Even the press might be compromised. And then, an idea. He pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed. The call rang once. Twice. Then, a voice answered. "You better have something good," the voice said. The detective took a deep breath. "I have proof of police corruption. And I need the world to see it." The voice hesitated. "Then, where do we meet?" "One shot at the truth." The detective looked down at Max, who was watching him closely. This was it. Their one shot at justice. They had to be smart. They had to be fast. And they had to win. Because if they didn't, they wouldn't live to try again. The cold morning air stung as the detective sat in a dimly lit cafe, his hoodie pulled low over his face. Max lay beside him, his ears perked up, scanning the room like the trained protector he was. They had been running for days, moving from place to place, staying off the radar. But now, it was time to end this. The door creaked open. A man in a worn-out leather jacket stepped inside, his sharp eyes locking onto the detective. He wasn't a cop, but he had more power than most of them, a journalist with nothing to lose. "You better have something big," the journalist muttered, sliding into the seat across from him. "You're asking me to go up against the police department." The detective placed a USB drive on the table. "This has everything," he said. "The erased files, the real witness statements, phone call logs linking the chief to the crime. And a confession. Before the officer died, he admitted he was following orders." The journalist picked up the drive, turning it in his fingers. "And you trust me with this?" "I have no choice," the detective said. "I can't fight them from the shadows forever." The journalist leaned back, exhaling. "This is dangerous." "They're already trying to kill me," the detective said. "I'd rather die telling the truth than live hiding from it." The storm breaks. The next morning, it happened. The journalist released everything. Every file. Every piece of evidence. Every name. It spread like wildfire, news channels, social media, headlines across the country. Massive corruption in the police department, chief of police under investigation. Wrongfully convicted officers case reopened, public demands justice. Whistleblower detective and K-9 unit missing, feared for their lives. The city erupted. People demanded action. Investigations were launched. The department was forced to answer for its crimes. And then, the final blow. The chief of police was arrested. Caught trying to flee the country, he was pulled out of his luxury SUV by federal agents, his own officers turning against him. The man who once held all the power now stood in handcuffs, his face pale as cameras captured his downfall. Justice had finally arrived. The detective's return. Weeks later, the detective walked into the same police department he once worked for. This time, he wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was taking back his life. The moment he stepped inside, officers and detectives turned to look at him. Some with respect. Some with guilt. The new police chief, an honest man brought in to clean up the mess, walked toward him and extended a hand. "We owe you everything," he said. The detective shook his hand, then looked down at Max. The German shepherd stood tall, his tail wagging slightly, as if he knew. They had one last visit. Later that day, the detective drove to a small cemetery on the edge of town. He stood in front of a grave, the grave of the officer who had been wrongfully convicted, the man whose life was taken away by corruption. He placed a hand on the tombstone. "You didn't die for nothing." Max sat beside him, staring at the grave in silence. The wind was gentle, carrying the weight of everything that had happened. The detective took a deep breath. Justice wasn't always easy. It wasn't always clean. But in the end, the truth had won. And as long as there were people willing to fight for it, justice would never die. The end.